We had heard the rumors, of course. The tales of eerie whisperings, shadowy figures, and an air so thick with dread that you could practically taste it. But that's precisely why we were there, test our mettle against the unknown. We were thrill seekers, after all. The four of us, Jake, Lisa, Mark, and I, had driven out to the ghost town on a dare. It was nestled in a remote valley, far from any semblance of civilization. The roads leading there were little more than dirt tracks, winding through dense forests and over rugged hills. By the time we reached the outskirts, the sun was already dipping below the horizon, casting long, sinister shadows over the crumbling buildings. "Man, this place is a dump," Mark muttered as we stepped out of the car. The town looked like it had been abandoned for decades. The buildings, once sturdy and full of life, now stood as decaying skeletons. Windows were shattered, doors hung off their hinges, and the once bustling streets were overgrown with weeds. "It's perfect," Lisa said, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "Let's set up camp in the town square." We gathered our gear and headed towards the center of the town. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The wind whispered through the broken windows, and every now and then I thought I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. But whenever I turned to look, there was nothing there. Jake was the bravest of us all, or maybe just the most foolhardy. He had brought along a Ouija board, determined to make contact with whatever spirits might linger here. "Let's do this," he said, setting it down on an old rickety table we found in what used to be a saloon. The rest of us exchanged uneasy glances, but reluctantly joined him. We formed a circle around the board, placing our fingers lightly on the planchette. "Is anyone here with us?" Jake asked, his voice steady. For a long moment nothing happened. Then, slowly, the planchette began to move. We all gasped, watching as it spelled out a single word: "Leave." "This is nuts," Mark said, his voice trembling. "It's just a trick. One of you is pushing it." But none of us were. Our fingers were barely touching the planchette. "Ask it something else," Lisa whispered. "Why should we leave?" Jake asked. The planchette moved faster this time, spelling out a chilling message. "Danger. Curse." A cold shiver ran down my spine. "Maybe we should listen," I said, glancing around nervously. The darkness seemed to be closing in on us, the air growing colder by the second. "Don't be a chicken," Jake scoffed. "Let's split up and explore. We'll meet back here in an hour." Reluctantly, we agreed. Jake and Lisa headed towards the old church at the end of the street, while Mark and I made our way to what looked like the remains of a schoolhouse. The schoolhouse was even creepier up close. The doors creaked as we pushed them open, revealing a long hallway lined with dusty lockers and faded posters. "This place gives me the creeps," Mark said, shining his flashlight around. "Tell me about it," I muttered, peering into one of the classrooms. Desks were overturned. Papers scattered across the floor, and the blackboard was covered in what looked like frantic scribblings. "Let's just take a quick look and get out of here." We moved from room to room, finding more signs of the town's sudden abandonment. It was as if everyone had just up and left in the middle of their daily routines. But the most unsettling part was the silence. Not even the wind seemed to penetrate these walls. We were about to head back when we heard it, a faint ghostly whispering. "Did you hear that?" Mark asked, his eyes wide with fear. I nodded, my heart pounding. "Let's go, now." We hurried back to the town square, only to find it empty. Jake and Lisa were nowhere to be seen. "Maybe they got lost," Mark suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. We waited for what felt like hours, but they never returned. Panic set in. "We need to find them," I said. "Something's not right." We ventured towards the church, calling out their names. The doors were slightly ajar, and as we stepped inside, the temperature seemed to plummet. The pews were covered in dust, and cobwebs hung from the ceiling. But what caught our attention was the altar. On it lay the Ouija board, its planchette resting on a new message: "Trapped." "Jake! Lisa!" we shouted, but our voices echoed back at us, hollow and empty. "Let's get out of here," Mark said, his face pale. "We'll come back with help." But as we turned to leave, the doors slammed shut with a deafening bang. We were plunged into darkness, the only light coming from our flickering flashlights. "This can't be happening," Mark whispered, his voice shaking. We stumbled through the church, desperate to find another way out. But the shadows seemed to move, closing in on us. I could feel a presence, something malevolent and ancient, watching us. Finally, we found a side door and burst out into the cold night air. But the town looked different. The buildings were even more dilapidated, and the sky was an unnatural shade of black. "We need to find the car," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But as we ran through the streets, we realized we were lost. The town seemed to be shifting, twisting around us. "This isn't real," Mark kept saying. "It can't be real." But it was. We were trapped in a nightmare with no way out. And then we heard it. A low guttural growl. We turned to see figures emerging from the shadows, their eyes glowing with an unholy light. The spirits of the town's former inhabitants, risen from their graves. We ran, but they were everywhere. No matter which way we turned, they were there, reaching out with skeletal hands. "This way," I shouted, grabbing Mark's arm and pulling him towards an alleyway. We ducked into the narrow passage, but it was a dead end. The spirits closed in, their whispers filling our ears, promising pain and suffering. "I'm sorry," Mark said, tears streaming down his face. "I shouldn't have come here. None of us should have," I replied, backing against the wall. There was no escape. The spirits were upon us, their cold fingers gripping our flesh. And then everything went black. I don't know how long I was out. When I awoke, I was alone. The town was silent, the spirits gone, but the sense of dread remained, a heavy weight on my chest. I stumbled through the streets, calling out for my friends, but there was no answer. I finally made it back to the car, but it wouldn't start. The battery was dead and the gas tank was empty. I was trapped. The sun began to rise, casting a pale light over the ghost town. I could see the remnants of our camp, the Ouija board lying broken on the ground, but there was no sign of Jake, Lisa, or Mark. I sat down on the hood of the car, trying to make sense of what had happened. But the only thing I knew for certain was that we had awakened something in this town, something that would never let us leave. And as the first rays of sunlight pierced the horizon, I heard a voice whisper in my ear, "Welcome home."